always try and think not just in timelines ahead, like what's going to happen in 2 years, and not just what's going to happen to your product, but really all the different scenarios of the industry around you. Because Web3 as a market is very dynamic, goes up and down, it's a roller coaster industry, you kind of need to predict a lot of different scenarios in terms of what you're building. And I think that's extremely important to keep in mind. And that's something that we would have benefited from if we would have had that more front and center early on in our days.
Hey everybody, Tanner here with WAGMI Ventures. On today's episode, we have Helena Gagern, co-founder at Salsa. For anyone who's new, this is the WAGMI Ventures podcast, where we do snapshots with interesting builders and founders from across Web3. Check out wagmiventures.io to learn more about the syndicate behind the podcast. But for now, let's get into it with Helena at Salsa. All right, hey everybody, I'm here today with Helena Gagern, co-founder at Salsa. Helena, how are you doing today? What's up?
Hello. I'm doing great. I'm calling in from rainy London, but it's a great day to be building in Web3. And I'm really excited to speak with you today.
Love it. Yeah, me too. I'm really, really excited about what you guys are building, and I'm excited to kind of dive in more here in this conversation. So maybe to start, I think a good place to start could just be at the top. Like, could you tell us a little bit about how you discovered crypto and really like what did that introduction to the space look like?
Yeah, 100%. I actually got into Web3 through my mother. I know it's like the most weird thing to say, but it's true because my mother is an author. I was kind of working in startups before. I was at an incubator building an AI. Actually, maybe that would have been quite useful right now. But I left that. I wasn't that excited about the product I was building. And I was really trying to figure out what to do next. And I was eyeing Web3, but I was super skeptical. That was like 2.5 years ago. And I wasn't quite sure yet if I want to jump straight in. And my mother's an author, and she's written something like 15 books in her lifetime. And she has this problem where she has no idea who these readers are, right? Like she has hundreds of thousands of readers, and she has community that she's building on Facebook or on Instagram, but there's no connection between the people that are actually reading her book and how she engages with her community. And I was digging into Web3, telling her about everything that I was learning. This was over Christmas. And she got so excited about it. And that was really what made me jump in, like seeing this like almost 60-year-old woman who can barely use her laptop get really excited about NFTs and Web3 and telling me she wants to launch an NFT project to cut out middlemen and own her readership. That was what got me so excited to jump in. And so that's how I get in. But she didn't actually just get me into Web3, but she also got me to meet my co-founder, which maybe is the second part of the story.
Fascinating. Yeah, I'd love to hear that piece too, if you don't mind.
Of course. So yeah, I was working with her then on a Web3 like project together. It was an NFT book project. And I went to a hackathon in Miami to meet more people building in the space and really dive heads in. It was like one of my first actual real like weeks being like full time into Web3, not just eyeing it from the sidelines and learning about it, but really trying to build. And I overheard someone have a conversation about book NFTs. This was 2 years ago where this was really not a big topic. There was maybe 2 blog articles about it online, and that was it. And so I went over, and it was my now co-founder, Grace, and we started having this conversation over book NFTs and went for dinner twice. She then decided to fly all the way from San Francisco to Austria to try and co-work together for 2 weeks, which is where I'm from Austria. And we spent 2 weeks living in a mountain cabin together, spending 24/7 with each other. It was extremely intense, but just stress testing this co-founder relationship. And whilst we didn't build in this Web3 book space together, we started on an idea that was all about thinking, how can we draw in people into Web3 and the masses into Web3 without speculation? Because we strongly felt that the masses will not come if all you can do is speculate. And if that's the main draw, there needs to be real use. And so we only had 2 weeks. So we built something really simple, which was a way to give a shout out to a friend that is an NFT. And through that, get them to create a wallet and onboard into the space. It was obviously like a hack, like it was a pretty quick thing that we just put together. But what we did there is try and make friendship the thing that draws you into the space versus any financial incentives, which we feel is a way more accessible way to go about bringing, the normies, the big masses into our community. And yeah,
Love
that
it.
was kind of where we started.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, there's so many interesting points of that. Super interesting. Okay, so maybe connect the dots from that point then to kind of where you're at now with Salsa. Maybe 2 points on this. Like one, how did Salsa come to be? And then two, what are you guys building? Maybe just for the listeners who don't know what you guys are up to, just a quick introduction on what Salsa is.
Yeah, of course. So how did Salsa come to be? It was really that after, building this little project together, the first thing that we decided on is that we would be great co-founders, that we have very complementary skill sets, that we were more productive together than alone, and that we've stress tested this enough to try this out. When we came together, our skills were also extremely different because she's a software engineer. She spent a lot of years at Palantir working there and really comes from this data angle. And together, we were fascinated by this idea of how can we use Web3 data to help communities function better and to help improve communication as well within groups of people. And so that was always what we were focused on, is surfacing data about who are you even speaking to? Why should you care to talk to them? Who's in this community? And what do you maybe share in common? What we see today when we're speaking about, Web3 communities and Web3 community platforms, it's often, token gating, and that's where it stops. And we think that there should be so much more than token gating. There should be a completely rich and new experience unlocked by having all of that data. And so that's where we started. We then, went to build the first MVPs of that. There's absolutely crazy stories there, from shipping a first app MVP in exactly 4 days whilst also flying to
Wow.
in Bogota. Exactly. Yeah. From like, hey,
That's
we should do
crazy.
this, to standing there with the app in our hand and was actually showing it to Patricio from PoApp, who later became an angel. So there's lots of these like crazy, early day
Amazing.
stories that we have. And where we ended up today is building this tool, but really for creative people, for creative communities, with Web3 data obviously at its core. And the best way to describe what we're solving today is by looking at an example and just make this like really real for listeners out there. Imagine that you, Tanner, are like a super famous DJ and you have 1 million followers on Instagram and you're touring 160 days a week, and yesterday you played in New York and tomorrow you're going to play in LA, and you're always moving around. What you don't know is who of these 1 million followers are the people who went to your shows, bought your merch, bought the music NFTs you dropped, are your top listeners on Spotify. All of that data doesn't make it into the place where you're building community. So whilst Instagram and TikTok and all of these platforms are really great for reaching large audiences and kind of getting your message out there, they're really bad for identifying who the people are who you should spend the most time on, and then also making sure that you build a strong relationship with them. And that's what we're solving. So the easiest way to envision Salsa, and I was actually telling like a 88-year-old movie producer about Salsa the other day and had to use this analogy and had to come up with this, like, how do I explain this to someone, who barely uses a phone? And the analogy is, it's like a WhatsApp group chat, but every profile on there has all the data about, how many of your events has this person been to? Did they buy your music NFT? Are they a top listener on Spotify? All that data is front and center. So you just click on their profile and you see that, and it's kind of surfaced right within the community experience. And so that's what we're building. And it doesn't stop just at like providing a messaging experience that's really just a feature, not the entire product, but it's the whole end-to-end solutions for creatives to build their community. So we handle everything from creating POAPs or NFTs to token gating their groups with rules that can be as crazy as only if you go to my event, you can actually get in. So these groups can be hyper exclusive. And then to helping people level up within the community by saying that they went to another event, claiming another token for that, up leveling by creating UGC and lots of other things. So that's really the thing. It's like an end-to-end solution that's replacing a lot of separate tools that are being used today to create a frictionless experience for the users and also for the artist. And all of that is using Web3 under the hood. But, a lot of our users have actually never heard the term NFT. And when we then tell them like, hey, you just got your first NFT by being at the show and using this token that you just got to unlock this community. And they're like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. Because suddenly what I said before about financial speculation, that is removed from this word NFT, from the word token. And it's just like, wow, this is something cool that helped me get where I wanted to go, which is get closer to an artist I love. That's Salsa.
Love it. Okay, perfect. That is a perfect description. So I think one thing it's a bit of a recurring question on this podcast is, you kind of alluded to early days. There's all kinds of interesting stories and surprises, things that you weren't expecting, right? And I just love hearing a little bit more about what those surprises were. So maybe if you could talk just a little bit about like, what were one or two of the biggest surprises as you guys got started building Salsa?
In terms of biggest surprises while building Salsa, especially in the early days, I think a really big one is about when you're building in Web3 in a industry that's still developing around you. It's really crazy, and you should be aware of that. And I think that's something that's easy to underestimate. I love to use this analogy that when you're building a startup in a field where, let's say B2B SaaS, right? There's 1,000 B2B SaaS companies, there's a playbook. You are growing a tree, but you're growing a tree in a forest that's already there, and you see the other trees around you, so you kind of know what this forest will look like. When you're building in Web3, all the other trees are tiny seedlings, and you actually don't know what they're going to look like when they grow up. And I think that got us surprised on a lot of different levels. Like, for example, competitors who you think are competitors in month one might turn out on a totally different, pathway a few months later. And that's because everyone is building along their vision, and there's so much that is moving around us as well.
Yeah, fascinating. That makes a ton of sense. And I'd love to circle back on that in a little bit, because it sounds like you would have some great advice for building in crypto specifically, as kind of distinct from, B2B SaaS, et cetera, kind of like Web2 stuff. So, another recurring question on this show that I'm always fascinated by some of the answers it elicits is, early days are tough, right? Startups are not easy. And I'm always curious, maybe like one or two challenges that presented themselves early on in building, whether technical or business, whatever kind of dimension it may land on. What was maybe one or two challenges that your teams had to think about solving, and how did you guys think about solving those?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And I think the first big challenge that we had to overcome is the data part of our vision, right? As I said before, we're all about building community and supercharging that community with Web3 data so that you can see, what do I share with others? Why should I talk to them? Why are these people even in my community if you're the creator of it? But a lot of that data doesn't exist, especially when you go beyond your very Web3 native crowd who, have a wallet, have a lot of NFTs, have a lot of POAPs. Once you try and expand to people who have never heard of the term NFT and don't have a wallet, there's also no data to play with. And we suddenly found ourselves in the space where we were bringing really new people in who've never heard about this. And we had to give them a tool that works nevertheless and fulfill our promise of data and community. And so the way that we solve that is by basically becoming lots of solutions in one. I almost say that Salsa is like replacing Discord, Collabland, and like creating an NFT or a POR or anything else elsewhere, because we do all of that in one platform, super, super simply for the creator. And so we've actually started creating that data, right? So we have built tools to create those NFTs and then make it super fun and easy for people to claim them based on things like being at a certain location or having a ticket to an event, and making that a special unboxing almost experience to then unlock a community. And this is very aligned with something that Grace and I realized very early on, which is that one issue we saw in Web3 is that there's this expectation almost for people to learn about Web3 in order to come into the space. When in actual fact, if we look at other tech products that we're using, say, for example, Gmail, there's no expectation about learning, there's just using, right? When I sign up to an email account, no one is trying to explain SMTP as a protocol to me or the fact that it's actually decentralized. I'm just going there and creating an email account and using email. And I have no idea about SMTP or the decentralization aspect of it. And we're always striving to create that same thing for users where they get to experience the use of this technology without having to learn about it. And of course, if they want to learn about it and go deeper, that's amazing. But the reality is, not everyone on the planet will want to learn. Some people will just want to use, and they will want to follow people that they care about. And I think that brings me to the second challenge that we faced and that we're overcoming, which is this idea of, okay, then how do you draw people in? If you can't rely on speculation, and if you can't rely on ideology in that sense or belief in a technology, what do you offer people that's real use and that will get them into a new platform and a new technology? And for us, that was clear that that's why we had to focus on music at first, because in music, fandom is so strong. People care so much about these artists that they will follow them anywhere. If an artist says, come to this platform to get direct access to me, that's when a user comes and follows. And we've tapped into that. And luckily for us, what we're solving for artists is a really, really crucial pain point, which is that they don't know who goes to their live events. And the people that attend live events are by far the most valuable part of their audience. So we help them identify who their most valuable fans are, where they have absolutely no clue who they are today, and then build community with them, reach them, engage them over time. And the way that we've seen this played out, we've been working with a bunch of artists, amongst which also a DJ called Blondish. That's why I used that example before. And we've helped her identify over 5 fans who've went to more than 2 shows across just 10 shows this summer and surfaced them to her. And there was one girl in her community who went to 4 of her live events this summer all across Europe. And Blondish in the end invited her to come to a Dolce & Gabbana Fashion Week after party in Milan with her, because she was like, oh my gosh, this girl, yeah, exactly. Like, this girl traveled all over the world to come and see me. But that data wouldn't be there if it wasn't for us, because that data is hidden in ticketing platforms, stays with the venue. The artist just never sees that. And we make it visible. We make this invisible data visible. So I think those are the 2 challenges that we overcome. And, you know, we're still finding them and we're still working on them every day, but they're definitely very exciting challenges to solve.
Definitely. That's all fascinating. I would almost love to turn at this point to talk about, because you had mentioned you've started in music, and it makes total sense, right? It makes total sense. I think my question would be, if things continue to progress, really, like, where do you envision salsa being in the next 3 years if everything kind of continues to progress well? Like, what adjacent markets, or how do y'all think about that direction or trajectory?
100%. Music is definitely a fabulous starting point, but it won't be the end game. We're starting with music. We're going to expand to other creative industries. So I'm thinking here about the book market, right? The book market is actually a bigger market than the music industry overall, which is really interesting. And this is obviously where my passion originally started, but it's also a market where there's even more opacity, because not even the publishers have a lot of this like data about readership. And when it comes to granular data, like, who's that person? Can we reach them? The person who bought the book. So it's a very, very interesting industry to solve for. And of course, there's the other obvious ones, which is everything from, podcasting, what we're doing now, to maybe celebrity chefs, other creators on the internet. It's a very, very big vision that we're going after in terms of creating belonging and bringing people together through data for all these creative industries out there. And that's what we're aiming for.
I love it. Okay. So I'd love to turn at this point to maybe talk about Web3 a little bit more broadly, and maybe connect some of the things you've kind of started to say and said in different ways to kind of hear a more unpacked perspective. So, one question I have at this moment would be like, what do you think we're getting right in Web3 right now in 2023? And where do you think we could be doing things a little bit better too? It sounds like, if I had to guess from some things you've said before, it sounds like a focus on, a better user experience and making it something that people don't have to learn quite so technically or so in such a detailed way might be one way that we could improve. But I'm curious what a kind of more unpacked thought would be, like pros and cons. What are we doing great? What are we doing not so great?
Yeah, I think, to be honest, what we're getting right is that we're already doing better on a lot of things that we were doing worse at a year ago. That's how I would answer this question. And those things that we're already doing a bit better, but there's so much more work to do, is you've just mentioned usability 100%. How do we take a user and take them into the world of Web3 without them having to learn, without them having to believe, with them just wanting to use? I really believe that Web3 is so much more than speculation, and it should be so much more. And I know that so many other people are building towards that vision too, and that's the only way that we can reach mass market adoption. We've had a ceiling in terms of people coming in to speculate. All of the people who are interested in speculation, they've heard about Web3 by now, right? It was big enough during the bull cycle that they've heard it in the news. And they came, they tried it out, and they either stuck or they didn't stick to it. But now we need to find something different, like a different hook to get people in. And I really think that's the second part. It's not just about usability, but it's about creating real experiences that give value that you couldn't find without Web3. And this is a really tough one to solve. And it goes back to the challenges that we're solving. We believe that Web3 plays a very unique part in what we're building and in actually enabling us to deliver on the promise and deliver on our vision. But seeing more products build something that appeals to a normal person, that you can pitch an 88-year-old who doesn't even know the world of tech that well, and they're like, yes, I understand why this is a problem that people want to have solved. I think that's where we can do so much better. And I'm excited to see what happens for the rest of this year, what happens next year, what amazing products get built. I think, the bear market is the time where all of these products are going to see the light of day, because speculation isn't really a thing. And people have to focus on providing value beyond any financial aspect. So I think a lot of these projects are currently kind of in their early stages and will rise to more prominence in the next few months, in the next few years. And I'm so excited for that.
Love it. Yeah, I share your excitement. So, one question that I think connects to something you were talking about earlier, where you were kind of giving some thoughts on what it's like being a founder in Web3 specifically, especially as distinct from Web2. And I guess I wanted to ask if you could elaborate more, and maybe kind of a two-part question here, where like the first one would be maybe your most generalizable advice for founders building in Web3. And then the second question might be, or the second piece of it might be, if you had a time machine and could kind of impart some thoughts to yourself at the beginning of your Web3 journey, what would be that advice? Like, what would you most have benefited from hearing from kind of your wiser self now?
Yeah, what a great question. So to tackle the first one around advice for founders building in the space, I think the biggest advice that I could share is don't do it alone, because you don't need to. One of the most amazing things about this community, about the Web3 industry, is how collaborative it is. There is this shared spirit of building the future, and I think it's very much alive. So if you're a founder building in the space, reach out to other founders, try and do things together, learn from each other. You'll be so surprised how helpful people are. I've reached out to people never thinking they would respond. They got on a call, they helped. People who I thought were competitors became partners. This happens all the time. And I know that I'm not the only one who feels this way from talking to other founders too. So I think that's one of the most fulfilling things that I'm finding in Web3 amongst other industries that I've been in, is how collaborative it is. And I think founders should definitely leverage that. In terms of advice to myself, yeah, this is an interesting one as well. I think realistically, an advice that I would give myself is, back when we started out, is always try and think not just in timelines ahead, like what's going to happen in 2 years, and not just what's going to happen to your product, but really all the different scenarios of the industry around you. Because Web3 as a market is very dynamic, goes up and down. It's a roller coaster industry. you kind of need to predict a lot of different scenarios in terms of what you're building. And I think that's extremely important to keep in mind. And that's something that we would have benefited from if we would have had that more front and center early on in our days. And it's something that we're definitely doing much more now, really trying to play out all the different scenarios in which the industry might grow, might come back to power, the other products that are being built around us. Coming back to that analogy of the forest, it's almost, trying to study what seedlings look like in order to be able to better predict what grown tree will come out of it. I don't know if that makes sense, but
love it. Yeah, no, I think it's terrific advice. Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. Okay, so one last question here for you. What is your team working on right now, and what's the best way for people to follow along on the journey?
Yes. Oh my gosh, there's so many things. I don't even know where to start. So a lot of the main things that we're working on right now is making it easier for people to come and start using Salsa if they're not directly invited by just one artist. Because today, these artist communities, and the benefit of Salsa is that it's very exclusive. You can gatekeep your community in Salsa as much as the bouncer to the strictest nightclub in the world, right? If you only want people to come into Salsa who've been to your event, we can definitely make that happen. If you only want people to come into Salsa who bought your merch or who are top listeners, we can also make that happen. And I think right now, the way that Salsa gets distributed is very much like an artist bringing community in. What we want to move towards is being able to have, individual users just come in, see what's out there, join the things that they're interested in. There will be requirements because that's what we believe in. We're not going to build another interest-based community. What we're building is an action-based community. You have to take actions in order to get in. But where it becomes more obvious what's happening on the platform to everyone on there, because right now a lot of things are happening behind closed doors. So I would say that's the most exciting thing that we're working on. And think things like sharing pictures privately after events with only people who've actually been there, like leveraging the community more. And we can do that also for communities where we're not working with the artists yet. So those are some of the things. And your second question was, how can people find us? Was that the second question?
Yeah, follow along, find you all. Yeah.
Yeah, Twitter. And we're also now getting started on Instagram. So if you want to be our 25th follower, please come to Instagram. I promise that we're working on actually posting on Instagram, and that will happen within the next week. We're about to launch a new website as well that talks about everything I've talked about in this podcast, a bit more. That's also happening next week. And so I think those are probably the best places to follow along and connect with us, and then try Salsa and try using it for your community. And of course, if anyone is listening who is an artist, then please reach out as well, and we can see how we can help.
Love it. Okay. Thank you so much for coming on the show. This is super fascinating take on what you guys are building, and I'm really excited to follow along all the great progress. So have a great rest of your week here and take care.
Thank you. Likewise.
All right. Bye-bye.